Fourth presentation for this unit is on our next group of country explorers. We'll be working our way through French, Dutch, and English explorers, and this is going to round out our study of specific explorers for specific countries. Again, kind of going to bounce around times and places and people today. But again, just like how we saw with the Portuguese and the Spanish explorers, we want to keep in mind those 5 Gs of exploration that's driving the uh, age for the Europeans that we've been talking about for this unit. Again, the dates aren't as important. They're not going to be on the quiz or the final, but we should be able to, again, keep that timeline in order, keep the chronology in order here. So the first of the major French explorers is going to be taking off in 1534. So remember, Columbus is starting all this in 1492 when he sails the ocean blue. Now, Jacques Cartier is sailing to find the Northwest Passage. The Northwest Passage is this idea that, again, by the time we get into the 1530s, we've already had Magellan sail all around the world. So if we got our United States, and there's Mexico, and then there's South America, there's California, and there's Canada up here, right? So we've already tried, Columbus has sailed down into here, Magellan has sailed all the way around that way, right? Taking long. So the Northwest Passage is this idea to be able, what if we can sail north and west, right? Across the present day United States, because again, that's not been mapped out too well, or maybe north and west, right? That way. Now remember, if you're in, there's Europe and there's Africa, they've north and east is above that it's cold. So that's kind of the idea of what they're trying to go and look at here is this idea of sailing north and west around um, around North America to find land there. He's also exploring the land where the French have been fishing for cod. So cod's a specific plentiful fish that we see in the sea. So that's what we're doing. So Cartier's going to make 3 voyages, and basically the end result of these voyages is mapping a lot of the eastern shore of Canada and the St. Lawrence River. St. Lawrence River is above Maine, and it forms part of the Canadian-American border, and it goes down into the Great Lakes. And as we get into the 20th century, when all the Great Lakes become connected, the St. Lawrence Seaway is one of the major thoroughfares that allows crops from the American Midwest to get out into the Atlantic and thus the rest of the world. 1604, we see the French explorer Samuel de Champlain. He's going to be exploring further inland on the St. Lawrence River, again, still looking for that Northwest Passage or even an overland route to Asia. So again, the understanding of how big and wide the North American continent is still being figured out. And so the Europeans are kind of running on the assumption that eventually you can just pop your way through, and that's going to be a more straight line, direct way to get to Asia. Now he's going to establish French settlements that will eventually become permanently populated along the way. We can kind of think of, say, like Montreal and Quebec have their roots in these mapping expeditions done by Champlain. And these permanently populated French settlements will eventually grow to become New France. And this is France's colonial empire in North America. Now, we'll go and see just how big New France becomes when we get into colonies in our next discussion, in our next presentation. But we want to understand that New France is what France's colonial empire in North America will be called. Like the other Europeans, the French are also sailing eastward, so they're making trade connections with India, with the French East India Company, and they also established trading posts in China. So again, we're kind of focusing on what will become eventually the United States, where the students live here, but they're just going like the French, like the Spanish, like the Portuguese, like the English, like the Dutch. The French are also sailing to the east into India and China as well. Now, as France, particularly here in Asia, expands its trading power, it's going to run into conflict with England, particularly in India, and this is going to be one of the contentious points and this is going to, again, this contentious point of France and England both fighting for control of colonial possessions in India will lead to the outbreak of the Seven Years' War. We'll get into that in a couple of chapters. But again, that can very much be uh, described as the world's first world war. That's the Seven Years' War. So that's Cartier. Again, so he's sailing in and around. We kind of see this area. That's Newfoundland. So that's Maine down over here. He's sailing down in and around the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then also down into the St. Lawrence River to be able to go and do that. All right. So that's the ship that he's going and sailing on, and that's some of the groups of Native Americans that he's meeting along the way, because you're getting into the Five Nations up there, like the Iroquois and the Oneida and a couple of the other tribes that are there, the Mohawks. So this is Champlain. So again, further down the eastern seaboard of the modern day United States, and as we can kind of see farther down into down the St. Lawrence through to Montreal, Ottawa, and some of the other places that still show up on the maps today. So that's what France is doing when they're sailing to the west. But remember, they're also sailing to the east as well. And so again, you can kind of go and see the different places that they're going and setting up in and around in India. Pondicherry is going to be one of the big French colonial settlements they set up in India. Now, when we talk about the Dutch, we're also talking about, again, the modern day Netherlands. So just keep that in mind here. But in 1602, the Dutch are going to be doing something a little bit differently than what we see with the English and the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese. And then a lot of the exploration done by the Dutch is going to be done by the Dutch East India Company, the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company, or if we shorten that up to the VOC. And the VOC is going to have their own logo, and this is going to be a worldwide logo, and that's again where we get the V and the O and the C from, right? So the VOC is going to become incredibly important. It's going to become very much an extension of the Dutch national power that we see on the high seas. The Dutch East India Company is the first multinational corporation, and it's believed to be the first company to issue stock. This company carried Dutch financial hopes to the far corners of the world. By 1650, this company had seized control over the Spice Islands from the Portuguese. They did this by having a more powerful navy and ruthlessly enforcing its monopoly on the source of the spice trade. We talked about this in one of the questions of the day, that by this point in European history, which nation has the most ocean-going vessels? And the answer is the Netherlands, the Dutch. So they also work a little bit more locally with the natives to be able to kind of get sweetheart deals. And then once they have those deals in place, again, ruthlessly enforcing the monopoly. And again, they're doing this at the source of the spice trade. So any other Europeans have to go to the East Indies. They have to buy it from the Dutch, and that's where the Dutch are raking in their money. Because this is a global venture for the Dutch East India Company, they established permanent trading points around the world for running the company abroad. For example, Cape Town in South Africa. We've got Africa, all right, the southern tip of Africa down over in there, right? That's if you're going from the Netherlands to the East Indies, right? That's a great point to set up a point where this is going to be about halfway. So that's how Cape Town is settled, because of it being an important trading port for the Dutch East India Company. Now, why all this is important? Because of this right here, all right? So the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, by 1669 was the richest private company the world had ever seen. And we can make the case that this is one of the richest private companies that would exist today if it was around today. So again, when we say VOC, if you're confused, don't write that in your notes. Write the Dutch East India Company, right? But again, the VOC, the Dutch East India Company, was the richest private company the world had ever seen. Some hints and winks and nudges for what we need to know for this company here. It had over 150 merchant ships, 40 warships, 50,000 employees, and a private army of 10,000 soldiers. and the company was so rich that it was giving a dividend payment of 40% to any shareholders. So what this means, this is the amount of profits being made on the company paid back to the individual shareholders. So if Mr. Cranmer holds $100 of VOC company stock, I would be getting paid a dividend payment based on how much stock I own. And again, this is simplifying a lot of things either, but I'd basically be getting $40 back every year based on my investment that I could buy more stock with and increase the amount of money I'm making, or be able to reinvest it that way. And again, I've done nothing. All I've done is just hold that stock. So that's ridiculous. Again, if you're getting a dividend payment of 1 or 2% today from your stock holdings, that's also kind of like, whoa, that's amazing. So a dividend payment of 40% is mind-boggling, bonkers. Stockbrokers would be salivating over a company that would be paying a dividend payment of that today. So this company is just raking in the cash. Uh, again, when they're enforcing this monopoly, they're doing this in very brutal conditions. But we've talked about this and touched on this before. This is starting to become a worldwide, multinational, multilingual, multicultural spice trade that's being taken over to get these spices ostensibly back to Europe. So the Dutch actually are hiring Japanese samurai mercenaries to enforce these brutal conditions on these sources and to keep other Europeans out of the Spice Islands. So that's kind of all the stuff that are happening. So you have Japanese samurai overseeing Indonesian and East Indian native peoples harvesting these spices to keep other European countries from stealing them so that the Dutch can sail them back to Europe and reap the benefits. So again, the VOC, we see the logo here. This is his logo, as famous as the Nike swoosh or the three stripes for Adidas or the golden arches for McDonald's. And you can see we're going from Amsterdam all the way over into the East Indies, which will eventually become the Dutch East Indies, which the Dutch will rule into really the 1950s and 1960s. This is a lot of modern day Indonesia, Sumatra, Malaysia, um, and a couple of the other ones that are down in there. So that's what they're going and doing. And again, you can read all the different stuff that's happening. Now, part of the homework and questions that you'll do will have to deal with the economics of what's going on in this time period. And one includes the great tulip bubble that goes and exists from this. And so one of the things that's going to be spread around this is all these different things, but tulips will also be a big deal as well because these quote unquote exotic flowers will be brought back to the Netherlands and to Holland, and the Dutch will kind of raise these for this. These different tulip bulbs will cause one of the first economic bubbles in all of world history, to where tulip bulbs, a single tulip bulb where we get one flower from, will be will be traded for $50,000 in today's money. And so this will be a big, huge, giant thing that'll happen. And again, as an extension of this spice trade. Again, if you saw the Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Far From Home, where he goes to Venice, right, Peter Parker gets picked up in a tulip field in the Netherlands as one of the plot points to that movie. So this also, these famous tulip fields, where again, if you go see these, they should be in bloom if you go to the Netherlands over your spring break. You can be able to go and see fields and fields and fields of tulips in the Netherlands, which are again products of the age of exploration. Another explorer for the Dutch in a more typical sense from what we saw with the other explorers there is Henry Hudson. In 1609, Henry Hudson is going to sail for the Dutch. Now, 2 years prior, Hudson had plied the open oceans for England to sail above Russia in a northeast passage. We usually ask the question, why doesn't it work? And the freshmen are pretty good at picking up, well, it's cold, Mr. Cranmer, and that's the obvious region. So the Dutch East India Company hires him to look for a passage through North America. So hopefully you're paying attention here. Right? We're going to circle back to that the Northwest Passage term on our study guide. We saw Champlain and Cartier looking for the Northwest Passage. Now Henry Hudson is also looking for the Northwest Passage. So he's going to sail up a river on the eastern seaboard, the river bears his name today. It's called the Hudson River. We usually ask the question, what major American city is located on the Hudson River today? And most people are able to give me New York City. And the Hudson River, he's able to get all the way up as far as Albany, New York, the present day capital of New York State, before having to go turn around and turn back. So Henry Hudson, right, in 1609 is going to be sailing in and around the eastern seaboard down to the Chesapeake Bay. And then he's going to be going up the Hudson River to modern day Albany. And then he's going to be in 1610 sail above the uh, Canadian, Northeast Canada, into present day Hudson Bay through Hudson Strait. And then his crew is going to mutiny. They're going to leave Henry Hudson and his son James in James Bay to never be heard from again. English explorers, we're going to cover a long period of time here, so we just want to hit on a couple of the big ones. John Cabot is going to sail for England in 1497, so this is just 5 years after Columbus. Now, John Cabot is working in conjunction with other English sailors, less in a capacity of pure exploration. Now, it's believed that English fishing vessels have already reached Newfoundland and the rich fishing fields of cod there, possibly in the 1480s. So we've kind of talked about European fishing vessels reaching North America, but not really knowing that it's there. They're just there trying to get their land legs back, get a break from the sea before they've got to go and catch more fish and head back to Europe. Now, John Cabot is an Italian sailor. More than likely, he is Giovanni Cabatio or some other Italian last name. So he is sailing for he's sailing for the English out of Italy. So his name's been anglicized, and King Henry VII has granted him a charter to go and explore. He is also, hint, winks, nudges, looking for a northwest passage to Asia. So this is again, what is this? We've got Cartier, we've got Champlain, we've got Hudson. This is now Cabot. This is the fifth guy that we've seen looking for the northwest passage over into Asia. He took a much more northern route than Columbus did, so he's going to really, it's not an economically successful trip. He brings back no gold or spices, but he does map out the first details of the North American coast. Without John Cabot in 1619, when the Puritans are sailing, they're not going to be able to go and find out where they are when they get lost without the groundwork of mapping laid out by John Cabot. So that's a portrait of what he could have looked like. And again, John Cabot is coming down here and seeing and looking at the earliest of the shoreline that we have. This is the model of his ship. That's the Matthew that he goes and sails on. And again, we want to emphasize just how small these ships are. But again, as we go back, let's ask the question, what type of sails do we see here? Well, we see the square European sail, but we also see, again, the Arab Latin sail on this caravel. So again, everything's still coming full circle as we're talking about the age of exploration. 1577, our next English explorer is Francis Drake. And Francis Drake is famous because he becomes the second person to lead a crew to circumnavigate the world. Now, again, spoiler alert, if you're skipped the third lecture on the Spanish explorers, we know that Ferdinand Magellan died in the Philippines, so he didn't make it all the way around there. But spoiler alert, Francis Drake is going to successfully leave England and then, more importantly, go all the way around the world and get back and return himself. So that's going to be a big deal. Drake is a privateer. So he's kind of like a pirate, but he's a pirate working officially for the Crown of England. So he's dispatched to explore and seek treasure and spices. So he goes and he leaves England with 4 ships and 164 men in December of 1577 to harass the Spanish. Now, his innovation is that instead of going to, and again, I'll throw in the United States, there's Florida, there's Mexico, there's South America, and then there's California. Right? So instead of going down into the Caribbean, there's Cuba, and harassing the Spanish there, Drake says, I'm going to go all the way around, and I'm going to attack the Spanish ships that are sailing out of Potosi, heading towards Panama or heading across the Pacific. because the Spanish have a lot of people protecting the ships in here, less people down over there. So that's his major idea. So that's automatically already going to get him into the Pacific Ocean. So he's there. He kind of runs afoul of the Spanish Navy that's protecting those Spanish treasure ships. He begins to flee back towards England, heading eastward, but he's blown off course into southern Antarctic waters, where then he turns around and, with the Spanish Navy hot on his heels, begins to sail up the western coast of South America, Latin America, and North America. He was landed and aided by the Native Americans in California. Some scholars believe that there are rocks with graffiti on them on the western coast of the United States in California and Oregon that is graffiti left by Drake and his crew on this expedition. And then from California, he takes off and sails west across the Pacific Ocean, getting eventually all the way back to England. We want to emphasize again, we've spent some time going away from this, just how dangerous this is. He left England with left England with 4 ships and 164 men. He's going to return about 2 years later with just one of his 4 ships, which is 59 of his 164 men. So over 100 men died on this expedition. But importantly, one of those 59 men is Francis Drake. Now, why are people doing this? What would be the reason to do this? Well, just how much money you can make. Again, we've talked about this again and again. On this one ship that returns, the Queen's half share of the cargo. So the Queen of England makes half of the cargo, goes right to her. Her half share, so half of the cargo of one ship, was equal and exceeded the rest of the crown's income of the Kingdom of England for that entire year. So one half of the cargo is more money than what the Kingdom of England in the 1570s makes an entire year. So you start then taking that other half of the share and splitting it up against the 59 men. You can imagine how much even the lowest paid sailor is going to be making on some of these voyages. That's why these guys are going and doing it. There's just so much money to be made if you can just get back with some of your cargo. So this is Francis Drake, again, another portrait. This is sailing him through the Straits of Magellan with 2 of his ships. And again, the ship that uh, Drake sails on is the Golden Hind, which if you go to London today, I don't know if like today in mid-November of 2023, I think this is under construction, right? But you can go and actually walk on a replica of this in London. And again, if you pay extra money, you can go on a cruise with it, but don't quote me on that. So this is the route that Drake takes, leaves from Plymouth, England. Again, he's not going to go to the Caribbean to steal stuff because he wants to go and steal things coming out of Potosi in Peru. Tries to escape back south, is blown off course, goes back up, goes all the way up to modern day Oregon before he strikes out across the Pacific and then works his way back to England. All right, and that's a successful voyage. The last of our English explorers and our last specific explorer that we want to talk about is James Cook. Now we want to draw your attention to this right here. Again, the dates aren't like mandatory to know. It's more important to know what these guys are doing. But hopefully you understand here that we've jumped very far ahead in time, nearly 200 years. So James Cook and his explorations are going to be doing it for very different reasons than, say, a Cabot or a Columbus or a Diaz or a Da Gama, because by the 1760s, the world has been pretty well mapped, and everybody knows where everything is. So James Cook is going to be sponsored by the Royal Society in London to observe the transit of Venus across the sun. So you can pretty much calculate by the 1760s to be able to know when all the planets are going to be aligned in a way to where you can see the planet of Venus move across the surface of the sun. So what does that mean for people on Earth? It's not like you're going to be put into blackness, it's going to be an eclipse, but you're going to be able to see a tiny little black dot in a telescope, or if you go to, because this happened about a decade ago in Plainfield, you can go in your backyard, poke a small hole in a piece of paper or paper plate, hold that hole up to the sun, see then the sunlight shine onto a wall, and then you can see a tiny little black dot go across that sun. This way you don't blind yourself by looking at the sun, but you can see the cosmic ballet of the planets and the sun kind of going in action. So the thought is that by sending Cook from England to the South Pacific, having a British person in China observe it, having a British person in India do it, have a British person in South America do it, have a British person in North America observe this, they then can go and use all the different measurements and calculations provided by those different scientists recording this to be able to get a more accurate understanding and measurement of longitude on the Earth. So remember, longitude, latitude tells you your space north and south. Longitude tells you east and west. So by the 1750s, we have a pretty accurate and reliable clock that can be put on these ships that's bobbing and weaving and moving in the open ocean. So that's what they're hoping to be able to do there, to be able to get more accurate measurements of longitude. Cook is going to sail to the island of Tahiti. He's going to record this event and he's going to observe the nature of the natives, which becomes kind of a big philosophical point that's going to be brought up and bring about the idea of the noble savage, which we can talk about with the Enlightenment in your college classes when you get there. To summarize James Cook, he's going to make three voyages in total. Like we said, his first explores the island of Tahiti, other islands, and he's looking for a great southern continent, a Terra Australis, to kind of go and balance out the globe. Secondly, he's going to be looking for that Terra Australis, and he sails as far south as Antarctica. And third, he's looking for a Northwest Passage. So Ian Swinks Nudges is another guy looking for the Northwest Passage. But he's going to be looking for the Northwest Passage by going from, let's draw the United States. He's going to be sailing from west to east, eastward across where everybody else has been sailing that way. So that's what he's going to be going and doing. As he's going and sailing in the Pacific on this third voyage, he's going to stop on the Hawaiian Islands. There, he's going to get into a quarrel with the locals on the Hawaiian Islands, and Cook is going to be killed on the beaches of the Hawaiian Islands as he's going and sailing all around there. So this is Captain James Cook, and again, he's famous for mapping a lot of the South Pacific for England and the benefit of Europeans who have no idea about this. So you can kind of go and see that, again, the three different ones. We usually ask the question, where is he always kind of ending up on all these different voyages? Well, he's an island of New Zealand. And so again, we can see that. Why has it become dotted lines right here? Well, what's right here? That's the Hawaiian Islands. So this is where Cook goes and dies. His second in command, Vancouver, takes over. Vancouver is sailing up over here. This is why Vancouver Island is named after him. And again, one of the reasons he does that is to go and observe the transit of Venus. So that's why he shows up there in the first place. Again, sails as far south as modern day Antarctica, and then goes and gets himself murdered and killed on the beaches of the Hawaiian Islands when he and his crew get into a dispute with the Hawaiians that are on the island there. So that's going to wrap up our discussion of English explorers. I very rarely just want to touch on a great story that comes out of the English explorations from this time period, and that's the famous story of the mutiny on the Bounty. And this takes place on the ship the Bounty in 1787. So William Bligh is sent to Tahiti to bring breadfruit plants to the Americas, to get the breadfruit plants out of Tahiti, to bring them back to the Americas and then to England to be able to do this. And again, they're basically following Cook's route there. Now, Tahiti is a pretty nice place to go and visit. Hopefully I don't need to tell you that. You've seen enough Instagram reels and stories to be able to tell you that. So when these men from England get to Tahiti and get to go and have all the fun that they want to have with the women on Tahiti, the men decide, hey, you know, this island paradise in the middle of the South Pacific with all these women who are very fond of us sounds like a lot better place to be than having to go back to cold, dreary, wet England. So when the return voyage back to England, the men go angry with Captain Bligh. They don't want to be there anymore. They want to stay in there. So about a month after they leave, Fletcher Christian leads a mutiny where they take over the ship and they dump Captain Bligh and 18 men adrift in one of the ship's launch boats. The rest of the men sail back to Tahiti, go have fun there, and Captain Bligh and his men are seemingly left to die. What happens next is one of the great human survival stories in the history of the world, and in one of the greatest feats of navigation ever pulled off. This 18-foot, this 23-foot long vessel spent the next 47 days going over 3,618 nautical miles. That's about 4,000 land miles. This is to give you a sense of scale. It's 4,960 miles from New York City to Honolulu. It's 4,094 miles from New York City to Prague, and it's about 4,179 miles to go from Joliet, Illinois to Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. So just to give you a sense of scale that's going on there. And they're able to get to the nearest land without a map or a compass. And then Captain Bligh gets the Royal Navy to go hunt down these mutineers to be able to go and get them. This is a movie that's been remade 3 different times by Hollywood to go and describe it. And that's Captain Bligh and his loyal sailors, right, being kicked out of the boat as the mutineers and the bounty sail over into Tahiti. So that's going to end and conclude our study of the different explorers, the specific explorers for our different countries. In our next presentation, we'll get into the ins and outs of how the Europeans are going to start managing their colonial land claims around the world, as well as starting to get into the exploitation of the natives and other peoples to be able to run these colonies for the Europeans for their most profit.